I'd like to welcome you to our live stream, Stop the Violence, a candid conversation about domestic violence in the African American community. I'm Charla Jackson, president of our chapter, and I will serve as moderator for the discussion. I'm a career prosecutor with more than 20 years of prosecutorial experience, and I work to improve the community response to domestic violence at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. Thank you so much for attending. We're so glad to have our guest, April Ross, who's the executive director and survivor of domestic violence, Trish Hardy, who works for the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She serves as the manager of capacity and technical assistance, and Vicki Kimbrell, who is the director of the Family Violence Project for the Georgia Legal Services Program. Did you know that 45% of Black women experienced contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime? Or did you also know that according to the CDC, Black and American Indian Alaska Native women experience the highest rates of domestic violence homicide, and over half of all homicides were related to intimate partner violence? We have a serious issue, and our panelists are here to talk about response resources and how you can help survivors of domestic violence. We'll start first with April Ross.
Good evening, everyone. I am happy to be here. Thank you, Charlotte, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak with such an esteemed group. I can't tell you how much I miss that in-person feeling, but here we are. So I want to start by just telling you a little bit about my journey, and then I'll share some of my thoughts on what I believe are the key things I hope you can take from hearing my story. I'm happy to entertain any questions when we reach that point in the program before we wrap up our time this evening. I am currently serving as the executive director of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, and I've been in this role for just about a year. But the trajectory that got me here is a little unconventional. So I'm going to begin at my breaking point. On a Friday afternoon in April of 2014, a friend and I sat in my car. I had so many things to do that day, and after helping him with his legal matter, I was anxious to drop him off and finish my errands before getting back to work because I had tons to do. But I never got that chance. Let me stop there and tell you a little bit about who April was at that time. I was a graduate of FAMU with my master's degree. I graduated summa cum laude in 2005. I was also a graduate of Emory Law School, and I was a practicing prosecuting attorney, which was my dream job. In my mind, I was on the trajectory to becoming a judge someday. I was the daughter of two college-educated parents who were still married. I'm the middle child of three. I'm an Atlanta native. I had many circles of friends, plenty of family in Atlanta. I had traveled, I'd love to say the world, but I hadn't been in that many places outside the United States. Although I did spend a summer in Japan while I was in college, and I moved to Minnesota after college and took a job working in marketing at Best Buy Corporate. I had never witnessed domestic violence in my home growing up as a child. I didn't witness it in any of my friends' homes. On the contrary, we had pets growing up. We had lots of friends who loved to hang around at the Ross's house as much as possible. We took spring break vacations every year, had birthday parties and big holiday celebrations, and I had good relationships with both of my parents. Why am I telling you this? So, well, stay with me, and I hope that, as they say in church, I hope I get to bring it on home by the end. So hang in there with me. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my relationship. By April 2014, I was in a failed marriage, and I was seeking a divorce. My perception of that relationship at the time is that I was exceedingly unhappy. I was emotionally drained, and I was at my wit's end. I had been married for almost 2.5 years to my high school sweetheart. It was a relationship that had endured for about a decade and a half. It wasn't always tumultuous. If you asked me then how I would have described my relationship to you while I was in it, you would have heard a lot of different things. You might have heard me say things like it was a fun relationship. I might have said it's complicated, maybe at times unhealthy, but that we were the ideal looking couple. Um, that it was an enduring relationship through the good and the bad. I would have described him as both my best friend and the person who knew how to hurt me. He was the person who knew me best, but at times I felt that he used that knowledge as a weapon against me. He was someone who knew how to make me feel extreme highs, but also knew how to make me feel extremely broken. I would always say to people sometimes when things are good, they're great. And I always felt like I was walking on eggshells to figure out how to keep things in that sweet spot for us. We went on to get married in 2011, just as I graduated from law school. In fact, I like to say it was a hell of a year because I graduated from law school, took the bar, and got married all in a few months' time. But I was excited to be a newlywed. I told myself that this was turning over a new leaf in the relationship and that things would be different, that everything we had been through in the past was in the past, and that we were starting from point zero is what I would tell him. We're starting from zero. We're not going to, I promise not to bring any of my concerns about the past, that I would give him a fresh slate. And by 2014, I found that I was exhausted. I was disillusioned about the notion that I could do anything more to change things, and I wanted out. And so, the beginning of the year, I left, moved into my parents' house. And though I knew months in advance that I wanted to leave that relationship, it took me time to get the courage and figure out how I wanted to do it. It all still ended up happening rather abruptly. I didn't know that I wanted a divorce when I moved out. Initially, I thought I would just teach him a lesson, maybe teach him to appreciate me more. But within a month or so of moving out, I knew that I would not go back. And so I told him that. And then we went through the back and forth of me feeling the temptation to appease, me at times feeling the temptation to give it another try, and then at the same time, me battling with the feeling that I had to stand my ground. Ultimately, for the first time in my entire relationship with him, standing my ground won out. And it made things extremely volatile and intense over a period of about 4 months. It all culminated on a Friday afternoon in April when he tracked me down and shot me and my passenger multiple times. My passenger survived 6 shots with no lasting permanent injuries. I survived, obviously, but I was left paralyzed from the chest down. And within hours that day, my estranged husband was dead by his own hand. So I would eventually come to hear the accounts of my friends and family from that day. And this is a perspective I don't often talk about. But my mom and sister, friends, everybody at some point or another shared to me what that day was like for them. And it was a perspective that I was disturbed and fascinated by. My mother and sister both collapsed when they got the news. My friends, several of them said that they felt that all the breath left their bodies. No one understood. They didn't believe it was true. They didn't believe that it fit what they knew about us. Later, I was asked many, many times over, why didn't I tell them what was really going on in that relationship, what things were really like? We looked like the ideal couple. They thought we were the perfect pair. And so here are the points that I want to bring home. I am living proof positive that it can happen to anyone, and it could be hiding in plain sight. And secondly, even when you're the one in it, it may not be obvious to even you what it is. And whether it is or isn't obvious to you, it's difficult to talk about to someone. And so finding ways to support people, whether or not we understand what's going on with them, and making sure that folks around you know that you're an open and non-judgmental person may encourage them for you to be the person that they outcry to. There were very few people in my circle, but there were a few who knew and suspected that the relationship wasn't what it seemed. My mom was one of them, and a few friends. And in their own ways, they would encourage me to say things. But ultimately, I did not. I did not talk to them about the things that were happening in my relationship. Why? I was embarrassed. I felt the need to live up to what people believed about not just my relationship, but about me. And it made it difficult to figure out what you would even say to someone. How do you even start to say something? It also made it extremely difficult to leave because I felt the need to live up to expectations once you're married. Expectations, not just that society said, that people said that knew me, but my own expectations of myself. I didn't go into a marriage expecting to get a divorce in less than 3 years. And it was extremely important to me to hold up who I was. But I hope that that imparts you with something to think about, because domestic violence is not an easy topic. It's not something everyone recognizes. And I think that's where our big opportunity is. And so, again, I welcome any questions. I don't have a lot of time today, but I happily hope you take something from my story. And that is why I share it. But I look forward to all of us continuing to work together to build awareness and knowledge about this issue and take away some of the stigma. So that everyone can find a way out when they need to. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Let's hear from Trish Hardy.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to say thank you to April for sharing her story. It's such a compelling story. And thank you for having me this evening. I am really honored and proud to be here. My name is Trish Hardy. I am the Capacity and Technical Assistance Manager with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. By profession, I'm a social worker, but by career, I am a domestic violence advocate. I have been doing this work for over 20 years. Started out doing it at a small shelter in the panhandle of Georgia, and have come to this work and really have felt a passion for it and continue to feel a passion for it. About 4 years ago, at the coalition, we started looking at a national report called the Violence Policy Center report, and also looking at our own Georgia Fatality Review report. And as Charla mentioned, and statistics haven't changed with the Violence Policy Center report. As a matter of fact, as recent as their most recent report is out of 2018. And even though Black and African American women make up 14% of the population, the deaths that make 32% of the deaths of the women killed by domestic violence, by their partners in domestic violence. So looking at that, and the Georgia statistics mirrored those statistics. So looking at that, we started thinking that what is it that we can start taking a look at? What do we need to do to hopefully, stem the statistics from that? At the time, Georgia was ranked number 8 in terms in the country in terms of domestic violence homicides. So we decided to hold what we call community conversations, and we held those with the Black and African American community. And we went to several of the counties. We went to DeKalb, we went to Clayton. And when we held these community conversations, we did what we wanted to do and speak to the community. And that was individuals who were out there, living every day in their communities, and they were seeing things going on. and talking to them and giving them the statistics and asking them what they felt were some of the reasons and some of the causes for the statistic being so high. We kept hearing some overlapping themes when we talked about this. Um, One of the biggest things, and I think even April alluded to this, within the Black and African American community, there is this sense of we don't talk about things outside of the community. You don't talk about things outside of the community, and you don't talk about things outside of your home. When someone contacts a domestic violence, program, usually in particular for Black and African American women, that has been as a last resort. They're going to contact that program and they're going to have, questions that are going to be asked of them, typically by someone that they've never encountered before. And that's difficult to really answer these questions and think, I don't know you. And so, my goodness, this is extremely difficult. Even though when they contact programs, they don't have to go into shelter to receive assistance. They can seek, outreach help and all of that, but they're still going to have to ask a lot of questions that are going to be very, very uncomfortable and go against the grain of our community. Another overlapping theme that we heard was the stigma that goes along with being a Black or an African American community, the stigmas and the stereotypes, that strong Black woman, that we often hear about, that, and it's the woman's place to keep the family together, to maintain those ties, to hold it all together, even though things may be falling apart. We hold it all together. So that was one of the overlapping things. Another one was just, the things that come up when you are contacting or when you're interacting with the criminal justice system. We know that the criminal justice system does great jobs, they do great things, but historically speaking, within the Black and African American community, there has always been a very strained and a very tenuous relationship. Uh, and in that being said, quite often when Black or African American women do report domestic violence, or if they do call law enforcement, they are more likely to be arrested or criminalized by the legal system than other populations. And when they are arrested, quite often they're arrested because they've been protecting themselves. They're arrested because of self-defense, but then they become a part of that system. Um, and that's another overlapping theme, being or becoming a part of a system, whether it's the legal system, whether it is the child protective system, all of those things come into play, and the difficulty of then being a part of the system. Even when they're contacting shelters, they still see shelters as being a part of the system. This is an unknown factor, and I don't know what the repercussions, can be for me contacting those systems. Um, Quite often, also, women are told that if they do contact a shelter, if they do contact anyone for any type of assistance, what's going to happen is that they will be a part of that system. They are going to be arrested. They are going to have their children taken away. From them by child protective, and that is just part of the emotional abuse, and it's a part of the isolation that keeps people from reporting or keeps people from talking about things that are happening within their home. Those are all things that are very common when we're talking about isolation. Isolation isn't always having someone separated by miles. It is just telling someone something that is going to also keep them isolated from family, friends, all of those things. You know, April talked about how it can be embarrassing, how it can be, not just embarrassing, but it can be shameful. So I'm not going to tell anyone. And when you're not telling people about it, that lends to that isolation, because you start separating yourself from friends and family because you don't want them to know what's going on. And quite often, your partner doesn't always look as though they're any type of a villain. Sometimes individuals that are perpetrating violence against their partners are in the community the upstanding person within the community. They're law enforcement officers, they're ministers, they're the person that are taking care of the yard for their elderly next door neighbor, the fix it person that is taking care of things for that neighbor, for the church, for their in-laws, all of those things. So to think that that person would be someone who would be harming their partner is unfathomable. One of the other things that I will mention quickly is also the language that we use within what we call the DV movement. We use words like survivor, we use words like perpetrator. That doesn't resonate quite often uh, within our community. It is a matter of this is still someone's husband, this is still someone's partner, and so using terms like survivor or abuser or perpetrator are things that just simply don't resonate. And when you're talking to an advocate or you're talking to someone within the criminal justice system and you're hearing those terms, it makes it very, very difficult for you to stay within the context of working within that system. So those are just some of the things. We welcome questions. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have as we go forward.
Thank you, Trish. Now I'm going to introduce Vicki Kimbrell. She's actually standing in for Tamika Daniel, who had a last minute emergency that she needed to have covered. And so thank you so much, Vicki, for stepping in and providing this great information for us. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. I'm an attorney with Georgia Legal Services, and I've been doing this since I got out of law school at UGA many years ago. So this is sort of what I've been doing for my entire career, and I've really been grateful to be allowed to do something that you want to do, right? Because if you go to work and you enjoy what you do, it's like never going to work. Georgia Legal Services represents folks in the 154 counties outside of Metro Atlanta, which means we have substantially a rural practice. There is a legal services agency in Atlanta, and that's called Atlanta Legal Aid, and they represent folks in the 5 metro counties. So if that's who you need to contact or who you need to refer people to, you would go to Atlanta Legal Aid. But Georgia Legal Services, we represent the rural folks, the folks who are out in the counties, who are out sometimes where there are fewer resources available for folks. So I'm going to give you our number a couple of times, one at the very beginning. And if you or anyone you know wants to talk to an attorney about legal remedies for domestic violence, you can contact 833 GLSP Law. So what does legal services do? What do our attorneys do? We have 10 offices across the state in the cities like Savannah, Albany, Columbus, Macon, Dalton, Augusta. And we provide representation for victims, for survivors in all kinds of civil cases. The most the most issue that we're asked to do most often is for protective orders. And people don't necessarily know what that is, but a protective order is a civil restraining order that can keep an abuser away from a victim. That order can also establish custody for clients. It can set aside personal property from one client or the other. You can award child support and protective orders. It is the mechanism that initially establishes the obligation for the abuser not to have a weapon. So if you have a victim with a gun or a victim being threatened with a gun, a protective order can get that gun removed from the abuser. And as you know, and as April and all the experts know, the reason that the victims or the way they're hurt most often is through guns. So that is a high priority with all of the lawyers, is trying to take guns away from abusers. Legal services can also assist in advice and counsel on divorce cases. We don't do many divorces. We do name changes, we do custody, we do support, all the kinds of things that make it possible for survivors to escape the domestic violence and, more importantly, to establish their own lives independent of the abuser. The biggest barrier our clients face and all survivors face, I believe, is economic insecurity. If you don't have a way to support yourself and your kids, you feel more stuck and more entrenched in the domestic violence. We are able to establish what we call an economic safety plan for our victims. We have clients who stay because they can't get health care for their children. Well, Georgia should have universal, and does have universal health care for children. Every child in Georgia should have economic stability and health care for their kids, either through Medicaid, through the Affordable Care Act, or through Peach Care. Every child in Georgia should be covered by health care. If you need to figure out how that can happen for you or your clients, contact legal services. We also help folks with the financial aspects, either food stamps or TANF or some primary economic support for our families. Most important right now is we're having housing issues, right? I mean, their evictions are widespread across Georgia. We have two programs that can help with evictions. One is our called VLAN, Victim Legal Assistance Network program. Under VLAN, we're able to get up to $3,000 to survivors so that they can pay mortgage, rent, utilities, deposits, short-term hotel stays, those kinds of immediate emergency crisis needs. We can look at covering and referring you to a partner that's paying those costs. And right now, you may have heard in the news, the CDC has issued guidelines so that evictions can be stopped if the tenant sends in a declaration that their eviction is the result of COVID and that they are under certain income guidelines. If those things apply, then the CDC guidelines will stop the eviction. So if you want to know if that policy or those programs or that guideline applies to you, again, you need to contact Georgia Legal Services, where we would be glad to talk with you. We, in fact, help victims get Medicaid coverage for themselves. Georgia has been an incredibly stingy state about expanding Medicaid and has refused to expand Medicaid. But there are many women who qualify for what's called Planning for Healthy Babies, which is sort of this strange program name, but it can get Medicaid and reproductive health care for women up to 200% of the federal poverty level. So all of those kinds of programs can help victims establish safety, get some sort of economic plan going, and get them on that first road to recovery if they need legal assistance. Since we've been in this pandemic, we've been talking about twin pandemics, the pandemic of domestic violence and the pandemic of the coronavirus. Victims stuck in their homes with their abusers because they have nowhere to go. We have seen a 40% increase at Georgia Legal Services since April in the number of calls of people reaching out to us. So my plea is, my ask is, if you have somebody with a legal need, or if you are someone with this legal need, reach out to legal services at 833 GLSP Law, and we're glad to talk with you. And hopefully we can provide some assistance with a legal remedy. Thank you.
We're commonly asked, one thing that people really don't understand is, why do people stay in domestic violence situations? Who would like to answer this question? Trish, could you answer that question?
Sure. And that's a question that domestic violence advocates for years, when we hear that question, it's like, oh my gosh, why are we hearing is, why does she stay, when we should be hearing is, why is the perpetrator, continuing to perpetrate the violence? And women stay for many, many reasons. They stay, Vicki mentioned the economic abuse. You're staying because um, of housing issues. You're staying because of, some women feel as though if they do choose to go into a shelter, if they choose to leave, are my kids going to be able to continue going to the same school that they were going to? Are they going to be able to take care of, still be able to attend their extracurricular activities? So they stay for those reasons. One of the biggest reasons people stay is because they want to keep their family together. And not only that, one of the things that we know is leaving is the most dangerous time. That's the most dangerous time. So when we ask that, that survivor, that person that's living in that relationship, they're the expert on that relationship. They know whether or not that's going to be the safest thing for them to do or not to do. So as I say, they stay for economic reasons. They stay to keep their family together. They stay for housing issues, all of those things. So it's very, very layered. It's not just one thing. It's, there are a lot of nuances that go into why people stay, but it's also the question, instead of putting the onus on that survivor, is, why is the perpetrator allowed to continue the violence against their partner?
What role does emotional abuse play? We talk a lot about the physical violence. We talk about the abuse, other abuse. We talk about aches and pains, hospital visits, but we really don't talk about emotional abuse and what remedies are available for that. Who would like to answer that question? April or Vicky, would you like to answer that?
Sure, I can. Uh, what role does emotional abuse play? I like to always point out to people. I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm hoping I'm not causing any feedback. I I like to always point out to people that um, a lot of times people recognize domestic violence when there's physical violence, and the problem I think we have in society is that there is less education around the other forms of violence or other forms of abuse that occur in these relationships. But what I always like you to realize is that the physical violence is never what happens first. You have to begin to groom and manipulate people. And oftentimes what that happens is through emotional and psychological abuse. And it's not even just as simple as, does this person call me names? It could be way more subtle than that. Emotional abuse is, you could be gaslighting someone, making them think that they're really the problem by turning around the reality of what something is, to make it appear that it's the complete opposite. Your isolation, we talked a little bit about earlier. Breaking off those social relationships and family relationships that help to build someone's confidence, and that may give someone some stability, or even give them a sense that they can speak up. We talk about coercive controlling behaviors, things people do to kind of dominate a partner that aren't necessarily physical violence. And all of those things happen in the emotional and psychological context, as far as going extreme jealousy, telling someone what they can or cannot wear, how much they can or cannot spend when they go out, what they have to do in terms of gender roles in the household, what is their job, and what you have to do to make me happy. So the emotional impact of all of that on a human being, when you think about it, it starts to wear you down. And again, there's also not. We also tend to focus on the negative emotional behaviors, but you have to also focus on the positive reinforcement emotional behaviors that abusers use. So like I say, if you go out on a date with someone the first time and they call you names, slap you around, or treat you bad, you're never going out on a date with them again. But if they gradually start with all of those things that feel like flattery and that make you feel special and that make you feel like this person truly cares about you, but then you slowly start to see this kind of back and forth in terms of their personality and the way they treat you. That's a part of the emotional abuse tactic. They have to woo you and get you to where you want more of that, what feels good. I told you earlier when I told my story, when it feels good, it's great, but then that person is the same person that can bring you to the lowest low. And you're always finding yourself in a state of trying to get back to that great point. And that is what emotional abuse does to a victim. It's not that they're staying because they like to get beat down. There are times when that abuser is their dream guy or whatever they feel, and that plays into it as well.
I have a question for Vicky. In talking about emotional abuse, if you're being emotionally abused but not physically abused, can that be the basis of securing a protective order?
It does depend on what issues are being, how the wording is termed for the victim. We always talk to victims. When I talk to victims, I say it can be family violence, but still not covered by the Family Violence Act in Georgia. So some things that are family violence are not covered, and you can't get a protective order for. When somebody is being just demeaning and ugly, I have clients who tell me, I'd rather go through the abuse, the physical abuse, than suffer from some of the things that this person says to me. That's what just hurts me in my heart. But some things are just not covered by the Family Violence Act. What's covered by the Family Violence Act is essentially physical violence. There can be words that are covered, for example, if they're threats, if they're real threats, I intend to hurt you, I intend to do this or that to you, with some real action behind it that a reasonable person would be afraid of, then that can be assault. But usually under the Family Violence Act, there has to be a physical touching, a physical violence, a threat, a reasonable threat to your safety. So it can be physical violence. It may not always also be covered under the Family Violence Act.
Trish, why is it that isn't domestic violence just someone losing their temper with their partner? Someone just having a partner with a bad temper?
Yeah, if that was the case, and that's quite often, what people think, oh, the person just snapped, or, they were having a bad day. If it was losing their temper, if that person is at work and they lose their temper, they don't assault their boss. If they get mad at their neighbor, quite often they're not assaulting their neighbor. They are looking very intentionally at who it is they can perpetrate this power and control over. So it's intentional. It's purposeful to gain and maintain that power and control, and not because I'm angry. I'm having a bad day, and I just, as the one show said, snapped. It's not about that.
Let me just ask one follow-up question. How do batterers use power and control? How do they use violence in power and control dynamics as a tool?
And it is, it's the tactics that go underneath that. So it's not just the physical aspect, but it's that emotional aspect. They use the power and control with the emotional aspect to have someone who is in that really high, April just talked about it in terms of like when it's great, but then when it's bad, it's really bad. Or the power and control of using children. If you leave, I am going to seek custody of the children. And in a lot of cases where their partner does seek custody, a lot of times they actually are able to, gain custody, and just keeping people, in that system for a while, using the kids just in terms of, kids don't want to be away from dad. So, that's another push and pull that is used with that power and control. So,
We've talked about a lot about women as victims of domestic violence. What about men? Can a man be a victim of domestic violence? And does it work the same way?
men certainly can be, and they are victims of domestic violence, and it does work the same way. There are those tactics of power and control. There is the physical violence, there's the emotional and the verbal. So yes, but we do know, and some of that may just because men don't report as often as women, but the statistics bear out that about 85% of the victims of domestic violence that we know are women. 15 or so are men.
Vicki, what do you, in addition to your legal consultations with victims, are there certain factors that you see in a relationship that could cause you to worry?
There are. I mean, we lawyers are required to do what's in the best interest or what their client asks them to do. And sometimes that's not in the client's best interest. Every day we are faced with clients who want to dismiss protective orders, and they're asking us to dismiss the protective order. And we are required to do what our client says. But every time in the back of my head, I'm worried about whether the client that's asking me to do that is asking me to do that because of some threat or some abuse or some manipulation behind the scenes. But as Tricia said, you have to trust the victim. You have to trust the survivor. You have to trust that she's making the decision that she has to make at that time. And so, we are required to do what our clients want us to do. So if our clients want us to dismiss a protective order after we filed, we go ahead and do that. We do the same thing with things like custody issues. We know that it's incredibly dangerous and it's incredibly difficult when children are in the middle of domestic violence. Usually all of our clients want us to fight for custody for them and to keep the batter away as much as possible or to have supervision of custody. But the bottom line, the decision is the client's. We represent the person who called us, and we're obligated to do what that person wants us to do. So that's how we try and make sure we're doing the best thing for our clients.
Thank you. April, I have a question for you. How, as as members of a women's organization and we have female friends who may be experiencing domestic violence, given the stats, it's highly possible that we are. How do you support a friend that you believe may be experiencing domestic violence?
That's an incredibly difficult situation to be in when you think somebody who is experiencing this and you're trying to figure out how to help them. I think the first way that you support them is being an ear. You have to be willing to listen to them when they're prepared to open up, and to the extent that they're willing to open up. Sometimes we want to, you get that feeling you want to shake somebody and just shake it out of them. or we talked about the why don't you just leave earlier. Some people are tempted to say, why don't you just leave him? And while that's tempting, it's more important that you just show your support through listening to that person, encouraging them along the way, particularly when they are feeling, notions of wanting to leave, but encouraging them to just leave isn't the end all. It's important that if you hear them talking about leaving, that you yourself talk to them about, hey, look, leaving is dangerous. So um, let's look at how we can do this together, and I'll be there with you every step of the way, and we'll do it safely. These organizations that are out there work with folks and they do safety planning, which is an incredibly important thing, something I didn't know anything about at the time. When I just was like, I'm getting out of here, I left, and I'm going to tell him I'm getting divorced, and I just told him, and it led to an incredibly volatile situation. Not to say that things may have turned out differently, but certainly there could have been safety measures in place. I never had a safety plan. So it's important to be supportive. Keep yourself knowledgeable. It certainly helps to listen to things like this, but the more you know about domestic violence and things like how to leave, the better you can be supportive to someone. But never try your best to not get frustrated with them. And when they do leave, and if they choose after leaving to go back, that can be incredibly frustrating for a friend. But you have to, again, show support and not judgment. Even in relationships that we're in every day, it's difficult to leave somebody that we know we should leave. And so why is a person in an abusive relationship any different? So being supportive is the most important thing, and resisting that urge to show judgment.
How many times does it take the typical victim to leave, or survivor to leave a domestic violence relationship, based on your experience?
Well, on average, they say on average it takes 9 times for someone to try to leave before they successfully leave and stay away from an abusive partner. And I can tell you that over the decade and a half that I was in that relationship, I called myself leaving a lot of times. In the 2.5 years of marriage, I called myself leaving more than the times that I actually did. And in that 4-month span before the shooting happened, I cannot count how many times I was tempted to just go back because it wasn't that bad, or maybe maybe we can work this out, maybe things can get better, maybe counseling, maybe this. So it takes a lot of times to leave. And again, I think we can all dig down into our own personal experience. Anybody who's done any amount of dating in this world knows that if you've been with somebody for a while, when it starts to feel like that time to go, it's not always that easy to just kind of cut that person out of your life. You've bonded with them. You've shared pieces of yourself and your life with them. And so cutting them off cold turkey and staying away when they call is not quite so easy.
How can organizations like women's service organizations like the Links Incorporated help to support victims of domestic violence?
Educate yourselves, educate yourselves, educate yourselves. The biggest miss that all of us who are fighting every day in this field for is that there is still a vast lack of public awareness around what domestic violence really is, what it really looks like, and what you do about it. Many times when I have go out and speak and I talk about, I've dropped safety plan, most people come to me and say, I never heard of a safety plan. Where can I find one? Or I ask people how many folks know the domestic violence hotline, either the Georgia Georgia or the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Most folks say, "Gosh, I have no idea." Well, I feel like it's a number that should be as easy as 911. So educate yourselves, make yourselves aware of what it is, what it looks like, and what you can do to help someone in that moment when it comes to you and you can do something.
Thank you. Trish, how would you answer that question? How can organizations like the Links Incorporated help victims?
I would say, educate and Be willing to have conversations about it. You know, I quite often say that domestic violence, we don't talk about it because it's not polite dinner conversation. We can talk about many, many things, but you know, you mentioned domestic violence and people have a tendency not to want to have conversations about it. So be willing to talk about it. Be willing to bring it up. Raise that awareness, as you know, April said, you know, the education, you know, all of those things. But I think it's just important that we have dialogue around it. I always get a little frustrated, you know, in October, when this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, you know, great cause, but we talk very, very little, even on a national level, talking about domestic violence, because people just have so many stigmas, you know, around it. It's not that polite dinner conversation. So yeah, awareness and conversation, dialogue. Um, One of the things I want to touch a little bit on the safety planning aspect. You don't always have to find a safety plan. Having a conversation with somebody they've left before, what happened, what can we do to possibly mitigate that? Because safety plans are always going to be unique and individual to that person. And really, it's just finding um, unique ways to help that person stay safe when they leave, even when they're in their home. There's a safety plan for everything. So making sure that you're aware of what it looks like to help someone leave state safely, stay safely, you know, go to work safely, and even protect their children safely.
I'm going to ask you as well, Vicki. As links, we do lots and lots of service. Each member is required to do a substantial amount of service every year. What are some of the ways that we could use our service opportunities to help victims?
Well, we're part of a collaboration at GLSP with, we're calling it the VLAN, Victim Legal Assistance Network. And I mean, look at the agencies represented. Look at the folks represented just here tonight. We have criminal law representation, we have policy representation, and we have the coalition service representation and legal representation, civil legal representation. So if everyone can not only get yourself to go out and do some volunteer work, to contact your local shelter, if you're a lawyer, contact legal services so that you can volunteer with us and help represent the clients. But if you'll just get whatever you're doing and whatever employer you have to contact your local domestic violence agency, there are all kind of volunteer opportunities for folks. There's all kind of mentoring that these clients need. These clients need clothes closets because now they've lost everything. They need furniture. They need a friend to talk to, somebody who's going to help walk them through. And you know, and in Atlanta, that's hard. But let me tell you, in Hayhira and Camilla and Columbus and all the smaller towns and cities outside of Atlanta, there are so few resources for people. But there's a domestic violence agency that covers each and every community that you're in. So contact that agency, try to volunteer some time with that agency on how you can lend your expertise, your resources, your time to victims of domestic violence. And, you know, I think that would be incredibly helpful to all of our communities.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Oh, Trish wants to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and another way to provide service, we have, you know, our certified domestic violence programs throughout the state. But at the coalition, we're also working with some community-based organizations that specifically provide services to marginalized and underserved communities, and finding ways also to assist those particular organizations to continue to build their sustainability. They are unique, that they're very small, but they're really filling a huge gap in the community. A lot of times when mainstream programs are not able to provide services to survivors, these small community-based organizations are out there providing services and filling a gap. So really being able to work with them and help them with their sustainability is another way to provide service.
Thank you. What policy changes would you, I'm going to let each of you answer this question. What policy changes would you, do you think need to be made to really help victims?
I'll start. Recently, the Northern District Attorney's Office came out and said that Georgia is one of the few states that doesn't have a state-specific law that removes guns from abusers. Now, I argue every time I go anywhere that federal law applies here and that abusers cannot have guns and that judges are required to take guns from abusers. But if we had a specific statute that would require guns to be removed from abusers, it would be incredibly helpful and make things a lot safer for the clients that I represent and clients that our lawyers represent every day.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with Vicki, because what we know about domestic violence homicides, the majority of them are, committed using, using guns, and it doesn't matter who the gun belongs to. If there's a gun in the home, then the likelihood of someone being harmed due to gun violence is high. So really just it belongs to the perpetrator. Being able to remove those guns from the home would go a long way in saving lives.
That's tough when you overlay that with the stats on the number of African American women that are killed with firearms. That gives us even more impetus to address that issue. And then April, I know you have some policy recommendations.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely echo what Vicki and Trish both said. And that is an initiative that the commission, the coalition, that all of us have continued to press in Georgia. I know in Atlanta, we're fortunate in the Northern District to have a U.S. attorney who is supportive of the fact that we need that in Georgia for them to bring the state law in line with the federal law. But there's other policy issues we need to be advocating in Georgia. One of them is we need to revise our Family Violence Act. We need to update the definition of family violence. One of the big misses right now is that dating relationships, a significant portion of relationships, are not included under the act because they don't meet the qualifying relationship test. So right now, if you to be considered under the Family Violence Act, to be an offense under the Family Violence Act, you have to either have lived together or currently living together, have a child together, married or former spouses, and let's see, or child together, living together, or current or former spouses. But that leaves out pretty much our teen dating relationships, so where there's a lot of dating violence that happens right now. Most college dating relationships, and even beyond teens and dating and college age people. In general, many relationships are still left out of that, and the only recourse they may have would be through something like a stalking protective order, which has significantly less impact than what you can do with a temporary protective order under the Family Violence Act. So we need to update that definition to include certain dating relationships. We need to also extend the protection for victims of domestic violence who want to escape a lease, who are victims of domestic violence. Right now, you can leave that lease if you have a qualifying protective order or an order of the court that would establish that you're in that domestic violence relationship. But what some states are doing right now, and Georgia hasn't done yet, is they're extending it to allow, if you have a certified letter from a certified domestic violence organization that you have sought services and assistance with leaving, that would also qualify if you don't have, for instance, a protective order that you've sought or an open criminal case or something like that. So we could expand that law to allow more avenues for someone who needs to get out of a lease to escape a violent relationship. That would give them that. We could also do things like extend protections that people have so that their employers cannot take adverse action against them. So there's a number of things, but I can go on the policy anyway. But if you'd like more information on that, you can always look on the Commission's website or reach out to us at the Commission on Family Violence, and we're happy to let you know what our policy initiatives are.
Well, thank you all so much. You've been, this has just been a great conversation. You've provided us with a wealth of information and expertise. Thank you for all that you do to support our victims of domestic violence and to make our community safer. And we're going to say good night. Thank you to our audience. We still have the chat open. If you have any additional questions, we are happy to answer them.